Hello, everyone.
Hey,
Hello.
Welcome to week 8 of backend development with Python and MySQL. This week, we're going to introduce a new programming language, Python. We're going to look at how to set up our environment, and also we're going to look at the syntax of writing Python code. All right. For this class, we'll need to do some installations, and we'll also need to have our command line active. So if you're a Windows user, you want to head on to PowerShell if you want to follow along. But I advise you just listen, and then when you get the recorded video, you then practice along. Okay? So the first thing we want to do is to install Python. And before we install Python, we want to see if we have Python already installed on our system. And for that, we'll type the command in our command line, Python 3, 2 -sign, and then version like that. If you have Python installed, it is going to list the version like this for you to see. If you have a lower version, or you don't have Python installed, or you have Python installed but it doesn't display the version, you want to uninstall what you have, and then you head over to python.org and then download the latest version of Python that you find. So have python.org/download. So let's go just do python.org/download, and then this will give you to download the latest version of Python for your operating system. Now, because I'm using the Mac OS, it automatically selected that for me. So you download that for your operating system, and then you install what you have downloaded. Okay. Now, from version 3.8 and above, we've had pip, which is a package manager for Python, installed along with Python when we install Python. If we want to see if we have pip or we have the latest version of pip, we'll type pip. Sorry. I'll have to close and open the terminal again. Okay, so we have pip 2 -sign version. And because I have pip installed, it has listed the pip version and the directory where the installation resides. If you have a lower version of pip, you want to update your pip installation by using pip install 2 -sign upgrade pip. And if the requirement is already satisfied, that means you have the latest version of pip. If not, it is going to update your pip version to the higher version. So these are the first setup you want to do to check if Python is installed. If you don't have it installed, you have it installed but you have a lower version, you want to reinstall it or install afresh. You want to check the version again once the installation is done, and then you also check whether you have pip and you write the code to upgrade pip. Once you are done with all of these installations, you might want to head over to Visual Studio Code. So we'll say code.visual studio, and what we want to do is to download. So code.visualstudio.com/download, and then this is going to open the different links to download Visual Studio Code for the different operating systems. So you click to download Visual Studio Code for your operating system, and then you install what you have downloaded. You can also use PyCharm in place of Visual Studio Code, and then you type PyCharm download, you get PyCharm. So install PyCharm. Try to install the community edition because that one is free and it covers everything we are going to be doing in the course. But I will recommend you install Visual Studio Code so we can support you as we are going to be using Visual Studio Code in this course. So PyCharm is an alternative to Visual Studio Code. It's also a great IDE. Both of them are very good IDEs. So install either of them, that works better. But if you have no particular preference, we will advise you install Visual Studio Code. Okay. So when all of this is done, you're now ready to start running Python and working with Python. Before we open our IDE, which is the Visual Studio Code that we have installed, we want to look at how to use Python. And there are several ways to write Python code, or from where we can write Python code. One of the ways that we can do this is to open a Python shell from our command line. And we do this by just typing Python 3. And a Python shell is started for us to type Python code. So we can just type, let's say print hello world. And when we enter, it runs the code. And if we want to exit the shell, we use exit like this. So this is one way of writing Python, using a Python shell from your command line. This method is not convenient. It's only for practice if you just want to try a piece of code before you actually use it in your software. You can write your code that way. We can create a new file and from that and run that file. Let's say, for instance, I want to create a file on my desktop. Do not bother about the commands for creating files from the command line. We are going to show you that in later in today's lesson. But I want to create a new file in my current directory. I'll create a file. Let's say I call this hello.py. And I've created a file. I want to write into the file. And I want to just say print hello world. And then I close that file. Now I have a file called hello.py. I want to run the file from the command line. What you do to run any Python file from the command line is to type Python 3 and then the name of the file, hello.py. You make sure that you are in the directory where the file resides. So when I do this, I have it run the file and produce the outputs that I expected. Now, when you have a Python file, that file has the extension .py. So anytime you write a code in your text editor and you want to save that code, you must save it with the .py extension for it to be a Python file. So notice that all of what we've created has the .py extension. But all of this is just for you to know that these are different ways of running a file. So if you happen to be working in a place where you just have to run scripts to analyze data or something, you'll most likely be running a file or a script that you have created. And this is how you run it, by writing a file, save it anywhere on your desktop, and then call that file using Python 3, hello.py, and it will produce the outputs that you want. So that is one application of this, using this method. Using the Python shell is when you just want to quickly test a function or a piece of code that you have written, and you want to see if it works as expected before you go inserting it where your project lies. So any question before we now look at the IDE and using Python properly from the IDE? Okay, so if there is no question, we want to open our IDE and we want to use this IDE to run our code. So you look for where Visual Studio Code is installed. If you have it somewhere on your desktop, I have a shortcut to it here, and I can just open Visual Studio Code like this. Now, I have created a folder on my desktop, and I name this folder course2-A. I want to put all of the files that we'll be creating in this folder. So when I open Visual Studio Code, I want to go to File, Add Folder. Let's say we want to just add folder to Workspace, and then I will go to that desktop and select that folder and add. Now we have that folder here when we look at the Explorer. Now I have that folder and it is empty. I want to create all my Python files and write all my code within this folder. So there are shortcuts to creating a new file. You can click on this first icon here to create a file, this to create a folder. Always make sure you click on this, the directory you want the file or the folder to be created in. Okay. We also have a command line Visual Studio Code, which makes it better for us rather than use PowerShell or our terminal. I will encourage you all to use Visual Studio Code as a whole. Use the terminal by selecting terminal here, new terminal, and it opens a terminal. This does exactly the same thing that our PowerShell or terminal does when we go to our command line. So this makes it easy for you to just use your command line here, run your file from directly from one screen, and it makes it uniform across different operating systems. And so people using Windows and Mac will be running the same command when we are using this terminal, and most of the time. So I have this empty new folder and I want to create a new file. Now I can just click this and create a new file here, but I want to illustrate something that you will need to know or understand for your assignment 4. And your assignment 4 requires that you watch videos from a prerequisite course, and that video is all about trying to understand what version control is, create your GitHub account, and learn how to create repositories and pull and push projects from your system to your repository and from your repository to your system. And for that, you will need the command line. And so let's just look at some basic command line commands that you will need before we start looking at the syntax of Python and how to write Python code. Now, if we want to see where we currently are, we want to look at the present working directory. Let's say I want to know what directory I'm on right now. I can see it here, but just for the sake of learning, to get the present working directory from your command line, you type pwd and it tells you what's the directory you are in. So if you want to copy the directory or the link to a particular page, this is how you do. You use present working directory and it gives you where on the file system you are on. If I want to create a new folder, let's say I want to create a new folder in this course2 folder, I'm going to use make directory written like this, and before you create a new folder, make sure that you have navigated into the current folder that you want to create a folder in. I'll do something now. I'm on my desktop now, and I want to go into my course2-24A folder because that is where I want to create my new folder. So I'm going to do cd, which means change directory, and because I'm on my desktop, I will just type the name of the folder that I want to go into from my desktop, 24A. You won't understand all of this in one day, but once you watch your prerequisite video, you will understand this a little better. And if you have any problems, book a one-on-one and we will guide you to better or a deeper understanding at your pace. So we have change directory and we change directory to the directory name. So you always use cd space and the name of the directory you want to move into. And now you will see it listed here as a directory. We want to create a new folder within this course2 directory, and we'll do make directory as the command, and then the name of the new folder. And let's say we want this name to be topics, or let's say classes. And then when I enter, we'll see that a new folder called classes has been created within this folder. If I want to create a file in the classes folder, I will change directory, classes. That means I'm going into the classes folder to be able to create files in the classes folder. And now I want to create a new file in this folder. To create a file, I'll use touch and then the name of the file I want to create. Let's say I want to create a file called intro.py. And then when you're creating a Python file, make sure the extension is .py. Enter, and then I'll see that I have a Python file called intro.py created here. If I go to my desktop where I have that folder, I will realize that I have all of the folders and the file in that folder. So command line is something that once you understand how to use, you will prefer to use it for your day-to-day operations and for the things you do daily, because it's more convenient and you can do more stuff. It's more powerful than just navigating the file system via other means. Any question? So does everybody understand so far?
Yes.
Okay. So Python is a programming language that can be used to develop web apps. It can be used for scientific analysis. And majorly, I prefer to use Python for data analysis alone, but recently, several people use it to create web applications, and we use it for mathematical, functional, statistical analysis. But we are going to use Python in this course to create the backend or the server side of our web app, and then we're going to look at how we can use Python in different ways or to do different things. Now, I have this file intro.py. Let's look at what Python syntax is and how we write Python code. Now, if you are coming from course 1, we did JavaScript, you'll be a little confused because we know that we have semicolon when we write JavaScript to terminate a code. But for Python, we just terminate with the new line. So if, for instance, I write print and I say print hello world, and you write another statement. Once I go to a new line, this line of code is terminated. So we'll start a new line here. When I say print welcome, this is the Python class, and then enter, and so I'm done with that course. So I can print as many as possible, and then when I click on this run button, it runs that file and prints it. Hello world, this is a Python class. We are learning Python programming for us to see the output of this print statement. So to write something to the screen, we use the print statement, and in a pair of parentheses, write what we want to print to the screen. If it is a string, like a sentence like this, we put it within quotes, either single or double quotes. If it's a number, we just write a number there. If it is the name of a variable, we don't need to quote it, we just write the name of a variable. And we're going to look at all of that today. So one of the syntaxes, it ends with a new line. Another syntax of Python is that it relies on indentation. So when we have a block of code, and when we say a block of code, it just means a whole several lines of code that is a unit that functions together to do one thing. We call that a block of code. For instance, let's say something that I write x is equal to 5, then I write something y is equal to 10, then I say if x is less than y, I want it to print x is less than y, and then I say else I want it to print x is greater than y. So don't bother about learning the if-else statements. We are going to do that later on. I'm just using this to illustrate the indentation that Python relies on. Now we'll say that this is a block of code. We are saying if this is this, do something. So these two functions together, we cannot just say if x is less than y. It's not our complete code. So these functions together as a unit, and so it relies on indentation. So the first line is there, we put a colon, and the second line is indented to show that this continues from this. Now, else is a new one, so it's not indented other than the if, and then it must have the same, must start on the same line with the if statement, and then it's indented to say what the else does. So this is what we call indentation. If I save this, and I'll delete what is above here, and let me clear this, and I run, I will get x is less than y because x is 5, y is 10. This is a basic example. If I don't indent, let's say for instance, I leave this to be to start on this line, I will see a red wiggly line here telling me that this is wrong. And that is one of the advantage of using an IDE like this, with syntax highlighting is one of the powerful things where you know where something is wrong and you need to correct it. But let's assume that we're writing on a text editor and we don't have this. When you run this, you will get an error to tell you that syntax error, invalid syntax. So it must always be indented. If within the same block of code, you must have the same indentation. You don't want to have 4 spaces here and then you have 10 spaces here like this. Some editors won't work. It will tell you that the indentation must be the same because you want all indentation to be the same. So you choose one uniform indentation to use within your block of code like that. If this doesn't start with an indentation, we'll still get the same error, indentation error here also. So the first one we call syntax error. This one, the error is for indentation error. So play around with it and see the different kind of errors you get, so that as you write your code more frequently, when you see an error, you know exactly what the error is because you have made that mistake before and you know why the error exists. So when you get indentation error message, you know that it's because you have not indented a line of code. If you get syntax error message, you will know that this is not the correct way of writing Python. Okay, and so this is the correct way now, and then when we run now, this is going to print an output for us without having any error messages. So this is the syntax of Python. Okay, so all you need to think about is that the syntax, the indentation lines must be uniform, and there is no fixed rule to how many spaces you leave, but it must just be uniform within the block of code. All right, so now I have used this code, and let's say I want to write a new code here, and I don't want to use, let's say, this print Python comment. So I want to use this code, but when I run this, it prints out the value of the evaluation of this, and then prints out Python comment starts with a hash. I don't want this to be executed. What you do in Python or in any programming language, when you want to leave a block of code on your file for later use, but you don't want it to be executed, you change that code into a comment. We write single line comment using a hash sign. Once there's a pound sign or a hash sign or a number sign in front of a block of code, everything to the end of that line is going to be excluded from execution. Python is going to ignore that code. But because there's several blocks of code we want to do, we can just use three apostrophe. We want to do 3 quotations, single or double quotes, and then we end with 3 singles. So when you use single, you use single. If you want to use double, you use double like this, and then you end it like that. And then this will be executed from execution, will be exempted from execution. And when I run, I only have this printed out because I have told Python to ignore this. I will use it later, but I don't want to use it now. Also, another use of this is when you write your code, you want to leave a comment on the code for other developers within your team, or even for yourself. Sometimes we write codes and then we come back some weeks later, we forget the reasoning, why we wrote the code the way we wrote it, what we were thinking at that time. Sometimes you want to leave links to external reference of reference manual of your function that you defined or something. You want to leave a to-do list or the things you intend to do with that code. You write it within comments. So these are the uses of comments, not just to exclude line of code, but to write text or leave a note for other people to look at, or to write author information. Like you want to say something like, this is the author of the write-up, the name of the file is this, and then you want to put a description of the file. These are the things you do with comment in Python. Do you have any question? Is it clear to everyone?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So we have something we call variables in all programming language and in Python. Variables are like containers for storing value. And the logic behind, or the reasoning behind having variables is, if you have x is equal to 5 here, and for instance, this value of x will keep changing across file, or will remain the same across file, or at some point it needs to change. And we have several places where x is mentioned, right? So instead of using the number 5, we want to use x. X is a variable that holds the value 5. So variables are like container for storing values. So we can give a variable any name we want. For instance, I say, I want to store the value of first name in a variable called first name. And I'll say first name is equal to John. And I want to store called last name is equal to Doe. And I want to print out both first name and last name. We'll do that later on. But this is to illustrate a variable that you give it any name you want, and then you assign a value to that variable. Now, it might not be so useful for you like when we are just learning the different parts of Python, but once we start building our software, variables are important where you want to store first names. For instance, you want to create a variable that will hold all of the values that the user will enter from a form that they filled on the internet. And so this page will be the processing page of that form where it collects those values. And you want to store the values that are collected in variables because you do not know the value in advance. And this value can change across users. So if one person fills, the value will be different from the next person on the next person. So you want to store all your value in variables. Sometimes you have a single value in a variable, and sometimes you have several values for one variable. Now we're going to look at collection types later on, maybe next week or the week after. And collection types are those variables that we can use to store multiple values. So we can use lists, tuples, dictionaries, and then we can also so we can use list, tuples, dictionary to store value. We can also use sets if we want our values to be unique. And so this is how we create variables. We have different data types that we're going to look at next week. And in summary, we just have number types. We have string types. When we say string, it means we're writing something like a word or a sentence or a character, and we put them in quotes, either single or double quotes. When we say numeric types, is just like a number, either whole number or decimal number. We do not quote those things. Those are numeric types. We also have other types like complex and the rest that we will see next week. So this is what we call variable in Python. We save values in variable so that we can always change the value of the variable as it changes. So let's look at how we can format variables before we end this lesson. So we have, let's say first name is equal to John, and we have last name is equal to Doe. When we want to print something to a page, we say print. Now we want to print first name. Now, because it's a variable, we're not quoting what we are printing. We're going to put the variable name, first name. And then we want to add the last name to it. We say print first name plus last name. Now, when we print this, it's not going to have a space between the first name and the last name. It will print both of them together, and it's not going to look nice. So when I run this, I will have John Doe printed without space. When you want space, we use the plus sign to concatenate two strings. So these are strings. We want to join them together, we use plus. But we want to add a space between first and last name. We can put quotes like this for a space plus. So say first name plus space plus last name. When we save and run this, we now have a space between them. When we have many things to concatenate like this, we don't want to keep using quotes like this. We can use the format string. We have a format string where what you do is to put an F here, and then when you say F, then you now quote, like let's say we want to write a whole text. So say F, we want to write the first name is, and then in a pair of curly braces, we want to write the name of the variable that holds the first name, and the last name is in the pair of curly braces, we want to write the name of the variable that holds the last name. And this is going to print the whole sentence with a space. If we're not writing anything like the first name is and the last name is, we can just put our curly brace like this, and then we run and it prints it. If we need a space in between because we have the quote here, we can just leave a space, we run, and we have the space between them like that. We can use the dot format, like let's say the first name is, and then write first name, last name like this. So we have several ways of formatting strings in Python if we want to print out. The most convenient one you want to use in your app development is to use the format string F. You start putting the name of the variable within curly brace, and then it will print out those variable names that you put as placeholders. This will become more understandable as we merge all our knowledge together into our app development when we get to week 17, part 3 of this course. So these are all the topics for week 8, and we'll take questions now. And if there are no questions, this is the end of the class. So anybody with questions, do you understand? Do you want more explanation? We still have some time to explain deeper. Is it clear for everyone?
Yeah.
Okay.
That is.
All right. So for assignment 4, you will need to head over to github.com. And then you will sign up to create your account if you do not have a GitHub account. If you have an account, do not bother creating a new one. You just submit the link of your GitHub. Watch the videos that are linked in your assignment file, and learn how to create repositories and how to pull or how to push code from your system to that repository, and how to pull from the repository to your system. And you will need that knowledge for to submit your assignment, and you also need that knowledge as we go further in this course. All right, so this is where we end this lesson. Thank you. Have a good weekend, and see you all next week.